And though it was the usual crowd picked to meet the visiting Duchess, still they wanted to see her, even if it was just to watch her leaving. So they slipped out of the walk-in freezers, through the kitchen and out to the front. Two women still in their overalls and hairnets, one still chewing gum, but with immaculate red lipstick, and her hair set because it was Friday.
This is one of the pictures of the 5th of July 1948, and this character here in the centre is Nye Bevan. So Nye Bevan at the time was the Minister for Health, and he was officially starting the NHS. So the National Health Service Act was signed this day, bought in, and this was the official handing over of the keys for Trafford General Hospital to become the very first NHS hospital. This picture is the presentation of the spades that cut the first piece of turf for the start of Park Hospital. So this was in the 20th of January 1926.
I was born here, I live here, I work here, I'm a patient here, I volunteer here. I always sort of say that if you sort of cut me in half, you'd have NHS sort of stamped through me like a stick of rock.
I wouldn't want to work out there in the private commercial that I'm proud of. I know it sounds corny and people don't really have this look at it anymore, but I am really proud to work for the NHS.
It feels like you're giving something back.
My auntie worked here, probably late 1940s.
My auntie, who worked here as well, and my dad's cousin.
It's quite a nice little family tie, that she goes along with the history of the hospital as well, sort of thing.
Yeah.
My grandma worked here when she was, back in the day, she came here in the 70s, started off as a domestic.
My grandfather was an American GI, and this was used as a US base as well. This one is when it was called Park Hospital, obviously it's Trafford Hospital now, and Davy Hume, and this book's dated 1929. So that is outrageous, it's nearly 100 years old. So if you're looking here, look at this. Obviously there's the clock tower, which we all recognise, but look how different it is.
Being born and bred round Urmston and Park Hospital as it was then, being the inception of the NHS, it's quite a proud, I feel quite proud of this hospital being what it is.
I was in residence literally in the Bevan restaurant on site at the hospital, and I just set up a big banner and lots of posters and some postcards with a question, do you remember your first day at work? And just started talking to staff as they were coming in on their lunch breaks. And then the second half of the residency, I was running a series of writing workshops for staff to get them to kind of create a space where they could be creative and a time to reflect on their own practice and their time working for the NHS.
The first time I came was in 1998, and I was working with a charity, so I did sewing and everything. So they had a raffle, and when they picked, my number came up, and I won a trip to the UK. Within the trip, it was my first time traveling. So I met this lady, I went to have a facial, and that's where I met my husband. So some of them, I said, matter to you, a smiling nurse, pain-free, and going home. And that's, we are top of the list.
I'm Jill Lambert. I'm speaking to you on Radio Wishing Well, which is, of course, your bedside friend at Trafford General Hospital, which is the birthplace of the National Health. So with the 75th anniversary coming up, it's going to be really, really important. Started because I was working with adults with learning difficulties, and one of my colleagues said that he worked for Radio Wishing Well in the course of conversation. So I thought about how my students could benefit from this. I thought about Desert Island Discs, which was a very established formula. You choose your 8 records and you say why they're important to you. And you give little anecdotes about your life, and then you can choose luxuries and books to take with you.
In libraries and hospitals, we contribute a certain part of our work is doing literature searches. I help do some initial work on statins and the use of statins for the British Heart Foundation. There's been multiple Cochrane reviews. So a little literature search where I've been sat searching for 2 hours on a certain topic suddenly changes what we're prescribing within the NHS.
In rural India, especially, trudging along miles to get to that single vaccinated child, it's obviously remained in my mind. I think I carried all of these experiences coming to the NHS, a lot of clinical experience that I might not have had in the UK, like many of the doctors working in the NHS. So I think all of us bring a different layer of experience.
Quite often people come up to me and say, "Oh, nurse, can you do this?" And I would have to turn around and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not a nurse, I'm a domestic," or "I'm just domestic." And then someone would turn around and say, "Don't say that, you're just as important." I'll think, "Oh, thank you."
That's lovely.
I can't remember what day it was. There was me and Jan, another domestic on the ward. And our manager at the time, she came up to us and said, "Girls, could you do me a favour? This ward will become a COVID ward tomorrow." At which point me and Jan was actually petrified. We thought, what?
As part of the project, I also ended up writing a play, which was drawn from the diary of a nurse who worked during COVID. So there's going to be a kind of script in hand read through of that play, and there'll be actors from the undergraduate acting students will be doing that here.
Did this really happen though? Do you want to hear the story or not? Yes. Go on then. And they all swore an oath to try, and they drove the Mini up the clock tower, and some people say that all those who swore the oath climbed inside. And some say that nobody did, that it was driven by a shadow or a ghost. When it entered the hospital, it kept going along the corridor, into the lift, then along the first floor corridor.
The participants that I was working with in the hospital, the staff, the process of that working with them was led by them. So I was guided by how they wanted to engage with the project. I let myself be guided by our conversations, and that shaped the structure of the creative pieces, but also the way that I worked. Throughout the project, conversation and dialogue has been really privileged. Conversation as a form of art feels to me a really beautiful way of listening, and it felt like a really powerful way of telling someone that you're listening and what they've said is important.
So Untold Stories of the NHS involves 2 project strands. In one, Kim Moore. In the other strand of the project, Jackie, Manchester City, in her role as Manchester City Literature Community Champion, and Reese in his role as Community Engagement Manager at Manchester City Literature.
The programme is really in place to collect and hear and listen to and hold a safe, secure space for African Caribbean communities. So the Windrush generation and the communities that they founded to come and share their stories about experiences of working in the NHS. We're thinking about literature in the broader sense, things like oral traditions in different communities. We're also thinking about things like magazines, comics, things like journaling, script writing. And so we thought about the whole wide world of literature in the broadest sense.
We did some amazing workshops with industry-leading professional writers in a range of different creative fields. So we had poetry with Shirley May, we had script writing with Keisha Thompson, we had fantasy and belonging with Micah Youngo, we had lyric and songwriting with a guy called Reese Williams, and Sefton Simpson as well. And then we also had Tanya Coley doing memoir writing, and of course we had journaling with the wonderful Jackie herself.
Some of the other interactions was follow-up mentoring. So once they had the opportunity to produce a piece, they let us know which which facilitator they'd like to work with more and which creative form they'd like to continue with, and then we paired them with those mentors to kind of get that piece over the line. So it wasn't that element of, you've written it, now let's exhibit it. It was, we believe that what you have to say is so valid that we're going to give you some more time to make it the best piece of work that you can produce and present.
The Windrush generation are the people from the Caribbean who responded to a call from what was seen as the motherland after World War II to help rebuild Britain after the devastation of the war. So, you know, they say you called and we came. You know, we were invited, my grandparents and other people in that generation, they were invited to come here and help to rebuild the country. And they did that.
Good morning, Sister Beryl. Morning, Mavis. You look like you're going somewhere. It's not Sunday today, you know. Well, Sister Beryl, I've got a job foreign, a nursing job. Them send for me, well, not just me, but them want midwives like me, you know, like great Mama Elva, who can help deliver and nurse babies.
When my Uncle Jim came here with my other uncle, Uncle Brods, they sent for my dad and told my dad to come to England. It was important to me to have these records because I'm looking at the words on here, the titles, and I thought, wow. This one here, which is called Soul for Sale. And then there's another one here, it's called West Indians in England. So when we play these vinyls or see them and hear the titles, we need to think about how they dance to them, how they use them to bring back memories. You know, there's another one here that talks about the island in the sun and the sea and so forth, you know, and 7 letters. And if you imagine that when they were in the Caribbean, whoever was here in this country would send a letter daily. So we'd always get a letter.
So I started nursing in 1982. I started off as a nursing auxiliary first. I've always wanted to do nursing. My mum was a nurse. We've got a family of nurses, aunties were nurses. I actually started the training the day before my 19th birthday, so I was still very, very young. For my birthday, my mum gave me my fob watch, because obviously it was part of my uniform, and it's inscribed with my birthday, but as a reminder of that's when I started.
My untold story is a story of the working woman, because my mum raised us as a single parent from the age of 11 onwards. This was my mum's pestle and mortar. She brought it with her from Jamaica. It's made of lignum vitae, which is the national wood of Jamaica. And my earliest memories are of Mum making our dinners before she went on to the night shift.
And when we talk about celebrating, it's about honouring truth, it's about sharing experiences, it's about honouring memories and in the truth and authenticity of those memories. Because not everything is celebratory in the traditional way that we would think of celebration in terms of partying and a joyous remembrance. You know, there are lots of things that were really painful for the Windrush generation and for the generations beyond that as well, in terms of, you know, hostility, in terms of racism that they face. It's a legacy of contribution. It's a legacy of giving in spite of the challenges and barriers that are faced. It's a legacy of generosity.
An announcement of a snap election by Theresa May's government brings the realisation that there will be no phone call with my dad. My personal link to a wealth of lived experiences, post and pre-colonial, enriching my understanding of the world. There have been other times when I've returned to that day, that ward. I wonder about the questions I could have asked, could still ask.
What was wonderful about the sessions is that, yes, we can acknowledge strength. However, there is also power in vulnerability.
The writing workshop is just a really, if it's done well, it's a really beautiful, safe space for everyone. But it's also a place of kind of held vulnerability, so you can be vulnerable without getting hurt.
How people were comfortable to share and how they were open to try and learn from the different genres, and also how they were so supportive of each other in the space. There was a lot of emotion in the space.
The value of creative writing in healthcare settings, in the workplace, where we had participants from a wide range of roles in the hospital, were really lovely experiences. So we had consultants, had domestic assistants, nurses, volunteers from the radio, students, all writing together.
Someone who was involved in pharmacy, we had nurses, we had people talking about auxiliary nurses, we had midwifery, cook, cleaner. So there were different roles that people talked about in terms of the NHS.
I'll go on the mountain and sing for the NHS and sing for my job because I love it.
I'm incredibly grateful to the NHS. It certainly saved my life many a time and oft.
We never would have made it without you. We would have lost it. That's it.
If your father ever falters, his body undoing itself for unknown reasons, a porter may put his hand on your shoulder and bring you back from the edge of panic. Or a nurse will sing as she holds his hand, and her voice is clear water. In the restaurant, seeing something lost in your eyes, a waitress will take your sadness and keep it safe while you eat. They are not saints or heroes or angels without wings, just ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Generations, providing patient care. Not just needles, we were combing hair. Do you see what I see? Do you see what I see? Nursing strangers whilst our children were back home, hoisting patients from their sick beds on our own.